I'm sorry about that. That sounds better. I thought my voice sounded big. Anyway, so first of all, let me start by saying, again, thank you for joining us today. And thanks to GTI, Global Taiwan Institute, for hosting us. Today's goal is to review the US-Taiwan task force that took a deep look at the US-Taiwan relationship. Last year, we started in 2022, taking a very close look at the US-Taiwan bilateral relationship, taking a comprehensive stock of how the relationship was going and what could be improved upon. Of course, at that time, we had no idea that we would have the president we have in the United States and also a new president in Taiwan as well. Today's event will, I'll introduce everyone and sort of take a moment to explain sort of where we've come from and where we plan to go. But first of all, I should introduce myself. I'm Allison Hooker. I'm Senior Vice President at American Global Strategies, a consulting firm here in Washington, D.C. Former Senior Director for Asia at the White House, the National Security Council under President Trump in his first term. Today we have with us the chairman of the task force, Ambassador Robert O'Brien, who is sort of 3 times my boss. Of course, at the White House at the National Security Council, Ambassador O'Brien is the chairman of American Global Strategies, and he was also the chairman of our task force. Also with us today, we have Shihoko Goto, who is the director for Indo-Pacific program at the Wilson Center. Shihoko joined us for our task force as well. And to her left is Carolyn Bartholomew, who until recently was the commissioner for the US-China Economic and Security Review Commission. Thank you, Carolyn, for being here today. And on the end there is Ivan Kanapathy, who also worked with us at the National Security Council as Deputy Senior Director for Asia, and continued into the Biden administration in that role, and now is adjunct professor at Georgetown University. Thank you, Ivan. As I mentioned, we began this process in 2022 by pulling together a bipartisan group of experts and former policy practitioners to take a very close and comprehensive look at the US-Taiwan relationship. From that moment in July of 2022, we did a deep review and this work culminated in a trip to Taiwan together as a task force in March of 2023. Following that, the report that we've been referencing was compiled and put together, and then in December of last year, almost exactly 1 year ago, we presented the outcomes of that report in an event like this with a different constellation of folks, some of us returning. And as I mentioned today, we wanted to take a look at those recommendations in the context of everything that has happened since that time. Of course, beginning in this year, we had the election of President Lai Ching-te, and we've seen the Chinese aggressive behavior continue, expand their exercises, in terms of numbers and degree, and the frequency have just continued to put pressure on Taiwan. And of course, in November of this year, we had our own election with President Donald Trump being reelected. And so today we want to think about all of that and review the recommendations that we put together last year. So with that, I'd like to invite Ambassador O'Brien to maybe give us a bit of a scene setter of where you think things are with Taiwan, with the United States, and with President Trump coming in a couple of months.
Well, thank you, Allison. I apologize for my voice. I've got a little bit of a cold going here, so it's not COVID. So it's You're all safe on that front. It's just a common cold. Look, I want to thank Allison. You were the heart and soul of this commission, you and Jennifer, and so it made my life easy as a chairman. It made all of our lives as the task force members much easier because of the hard work that you put into the commission. Just a couple of recent things that happened. I had the privilege of accepting a letter from President Lai to President Trump after the election, congratulating him, so that we didn't have a phone call this year like we did in the past. But the ambassador flew out to Salt Lake City, where I was for the weekend in Park City, and delivered a letter. And the CNN picked that up and had that story. So, but I think a great start to the new administration with Taiwan congratulating President Trump and we got that letter through Madeline. I got that letter right down to the Mar-a-Lago, and the president received it and was very, very pleased to receive the congratulations of the people of the Republic of China on his reelection. And I was one of the first communications on that front to the nor sure what to call him, the president-elect, the once and future president, but he was very pleased with that. I also had the opportunity just recently to talk to President Lai. When we went down as a task force, we met with, he was at the time Vice President Lai, and since been elected president. And he was in Hawaii on a transit. He was going to visit some Taiwanese allies in the Indo-Pacific, some of the small island countries. Stopped over in Hawaii, and he made calls to a number of officials. And I was able to tell him what the task force had done and what GTI is doing. And he was very pleased with the work that GTI is doing on behalf of the people of Taiwan. So that was a great interaction to have with President Lai, and to reaffirm our friendship with the people of Taiwan. And although we're all in a private sector capacity now, at least for a little while longer. I'm looking at Ivan. I'm sure he'll go back in. We will not make news today, but we're gonna have a great China team in the new administration. Some of the announcements are already there. Of course, Senator Rubio has been very good on Taiwan. Mike Waltz is a great friend of Taiwan. Alex Wong the Deputy National Security Advisor, has family relations in Taiwan. And then one of our own task force members, I'm very excited about, Jameson Greer, who several of us served with in the White House before when he was Chief of Staff to Bob Lighthizer. And he went to Taiwan with us and was a key part of our delegation, participated very heavily in our delegation. He's now going to be the U.S. Trade Representative. So our little delegations had some impact on the new administration, which is great. Some of us are staying out, including me, but I'll still be a big advocate for Taiwan from the outside, for the people of the Republic of China. So between the letter and the conversation with President Lai, I think Taiwan is making itself heard and making itself known to the new president, and I think he appreciates that. But look, it's not all roses. It's been a very difficult time for Taiwan since President Lai was elected. So all of you are familiar with this. He wins on January 13th. April 3rd, we have over 30 Chinese PLA Air Force warplanes in our Taiwanese airspace, and 9 warships in the waters around Taiwan. That's in April. In May, he's inaugurated. May 23rd, just 3 days later, we have Joint Sword 2024A around Taiwan, and Taiwan's surrounded by the PLA Army, Navy, the PLA Army Air Force. July, the 66 Chinese military aircraft enter Taiwanese airspace in a 24-hour period, the largest infiltration of aircraft into Taiwanese airspace in the year, in at least a year. We have in October, we have Joint Sword 2024B. And then in December, the PRC deploys 90 ships near Taiwan. So the Chinese are war planning and gaming out how to cut off Taiwan, either in a coercive blockade or to cut off Taiwan in an invasion. That's happening right now. And it's a reason that they're doing it is because they don't like the democratic process. They don't like the fact that the people of Taiwan got to go elect their own leader. because the story of the CCP, their many stories, is that the Chinese people can't govern themselves. They need a strong hand, they need a whip hand from the center, they need an emperor from Beijing to keep everybody in line, because the Chinese people can't govern themselves. Taiwan gives a lie to that. Taiwan shows that the Chinese people can govern themselves and do it very effectively. That parties can change, go in and out of power. That we can have peaceful transitions of power between the KMT and the current government, and it's happened, I think, now 5 times since the end of authoritarianism. So Taiwan is giving lie to all the communist propaganda, and it's a perfect laboratory to show democracy can thrive in the Far East. So the Chinese don't like it. The CCP hates it, and it undermines them. And so they're going to continue their actions. I'll turn it over to my fellow commissioners and task force members now to get their take on it. But I'm optimistic about how this ends. I'm optimistic because I truly believe that the innovation that's coming from a place like Taiwan with TSMC and all the infrastructure around it, the ingenuity of the people of Taiwan, the ingenuity of the people of America, the Alex Karps at Palantir, the Palmer Lucky's at Anduril, the Elon Musk at Starlink. The entrepreneurship is what's going to sink the Communist Party of China and their centralized control. They can thieve and they can steal our IP. They can try and replicate it, but we're going to always be one step ahead of them. And if we can get through the next few years and deploy some of these systems that we're developing now, especially on the UAV front, China's not going to be able to take Taiwan, and the future is going to be bright. But the next couple of years are going to be dangerous, and that's why we're going to be vigilant as a task force. I think we're going to continue into next year. We're going to lose a couple people to the administration. That's okay. We'll pick up a few more. But I want to stress the final point is this is a bipartisan task force. We've got people here who work for Nancy Pelosi. We've got people here who work for Donald Trump. But we're all united in this bipartisan consensus that the CCP is an existential threat to the United States of America, and the CCP is a threat to the people of Taiwan. And we're going to stay in the fight, and we're going to be here. We're going to keep this thing going as long as we can. So, with that, thank you, Allison. Thank you for giving me a chance to make a few comments, and thank all of you at GTI for everything you're doing to support Taiwan. God bless y'all.
Thank you, Ambassador. Thanks very much. And before we move forward, I will mention the names of the other members, since we're talking about the bipartisan nature of our task force. Thank you for your leadership, Ambassador. Keith Kroc, who was the former Undersecretary of State and now chairman of the Kroc Institute for Tech Diplomacy, joined us in the task force, as did Lieutenant General Wallace Chip Gregson, as we call him, Chip, but General Gregson, former Assistant Secretary of Defense for Asian and Pacific and Security Affairs. Derek Mitchell, who is Senior Advisor for Center for Strategic and International Studies. Kurt Tong, Ambassador Kurt Tong, Managing Partner at the Asia Group. Stephen Young, former Director of AIT. Lan Hee Chen, the David and Diane Steffi Fellow in American Public Policy Studies at the Hoover Institution. Gerald Green, President and CEO of Pacific Council on International Policy. Of course, we mentioned Jameson Greer, and some of these others that were going to join us today had last-minute trips or other events, so we miss them, but we do have their work in our hands from the recommendations. So when we put together this report and we started reviewing the relationship, we kind of bend our views and our thoughts into 3 categories: diplomatic and political recommendations, military and security recommendations, and trade and economic policy recommendations. So I thought we'd start, first of all, with just the diplomatic and political landscape. You know, we've seen a great expansion over the past few years, including during our last couple of years in the first Trump administration, but the Biden administration has carried that on. So a great expansion of the relationship, contacts, of other engagements. And during our review, we made a number of recommendations. I'd like to turn to Shihoko first, just to give your thoughts on what we put together before and how it stands up the test of time, given the developments this year.
Yeah. Thank you, Allison. And first of all, thank you, Ambassador Ryan, for your leadership in bringing us together. This was an amazing project. And of course, the highlight was for all of us to go to Taiwan together. And thank you to Allison, Jennifer, and to GTI, Russell in particular, for making all of this happen. Again, this was a diverse task force, and our focus areas and our perspectives differed quite a lot, quite frankly. But what brought us together was this strong commitment to promote and protect Taiwan. And this report came out last year. But it has stood the test of time, and I do believe it does provide us with the foundation for the United States to continue to engage with Taiwan moving forward. Deepening ties with Taiwan at the global, state, and local levels are not an option, but they are a prerequisite for not only for stability in cross-strait relations, but for stability in the Indo-Pacific arena, which is is under a great deal of pressure at the moment. And it is in the interest of the world as well to have a prosperous and strong Taiwan. And I would like to focus on 3 areas that the task force found when it comes to engaging further in US-Taiwan relations. The first is to promote Taiwan's engagement in international forums. That can be done on a number of fronts. The first would be at the multilateral level in areas that Taiwan is already a member of, and APEC comes first and foremost to mind. But there are also other forums as well. There's opportunity to bring in Taiwan as an observer to existing multilateral frameworks, including the G7 as well as the Quad. And these avenues can articulate the role that Taiwan has played and can play in advocating for the global common goods and reinforce how the international community can benefit from the greater inclusion of Taiwan. And we saw Taiwan as a responsible state actor and its commitment to global stability in providing much needed medical equipment and devices during COVID. But beyond that, when we look to the future, we know that Taiwan is at the heart of the information technology revolution. We know that its advanced technology capabilities, and especially its strong use of data science, these are attributes that should be part of global efforts to find solutions to critical cross-border issues that loom ahead. And another area for multilateral cooperation is, of course, to boost the scope and the membership of the GCTF, the Global Cooperation and Training Framework, as a platform to formalize Taiwan's multilateral engagement. I believe that the incoming administration can play a vital role in this as well. The second area that the task force found to enhance and elevate relations with Taiwan on the political and diplomatic front is to highlight that both the United States and Taiwan share an interest in furthering ties with the global South. And there are opportunities for the 2 governments to work more closely together in Southeast and South Asia in particular to invest in infrastructure and boost resilience. The ROC is in a particularly strong position to promote also the value of the rule of law and the value of protecting the rights of individuals. And we believe that bilateral cooperation to promote good governance amid a growing multipolarity in the Indo-Pacific should be of interest to both the United States and to Taiwan as well. And finally, the third point I want to highlight is that we are committed to continue to expand contact between the United States and Taiwan. Much progress has been made to date. We've seen many high-level visits, but the opportunity to regularize, expand, and upgrade contacts between the 2 governments is well upon us today. And the task force also found that there would be greater opportunities to boost partnerships between the United States and Taiwanese tech companies as well. There can be more opportunities for STEM research facilities in the United States and Taiwan to work more closely together. And as we talk about enhancing capital flow between the two capitals, we should also focus on the exchange of more human capital and people-to-people knowledge to bolster tech diplomacy as an integral part of economic security.
Thank you, Shihoko. That's very comprehensive and I think tees us up for some other discussion on this. Ivan, I'll turn to you just for some thoughts on the recommendations and anything that Shihoko shared as well.
Great. Thanks so much, Allison. Thanks again, Ambassador O'Brien, for chairing the task force. It's really been a wonderful, enriching experience. Allison and Jennifer, who's not here, for really doing all the work behind it, and our fellow members of the task force, who's been really, I've just learned a tremendous amount from myself. It's important. I know it's been said, but sort of the bipartisan nature of the task force and the recommendations of, and I think it's really across Washington now that we take a very clear-eyed view of China. And then relatedly, not the same thing, but relatedly, we also, I think on both sides of the aisle, take a very supportive and much more appreciative view of the US-Taiwan relationship, including, not just because this is a fellow democracy, right, that is under a threat, but a much greater appreciation now than ever before about just how important Taiwan is as a cog in the global economy to the rest of the world, and what could happen to us, right, if something bad were to happen to Taiwan. And of course, just the geostrategic nature of Taiwan, just physically where it is and how important that, frankly, that piece of territory is to the greater good in the free world. So those I think are increasingly being recognized here in Washington. I've had the opportunity to go back to Taiwan, I think 3 times since our trip, which has been wonderful. Twice since President Lai took over, and I can tell you that, kind of looking at the recommendations we made and the direction of travel, and it wasn't just us, obviously. A lot of folks really on the Taiwan side have done so much, but I've been increasingly optimistic with every visit. My most recent one about 2 months ago, and President Lai's, by any historical standards, his approval ratings are very high. So in Taiwan, people are quite happy with the governance. People in Beijing are not happy. Certain people, the leadership, right, the folks in charge. But let's be honest, the democracy is he's absolutely following the will of the people, and there's no denying that in his policies. The Biden administration has done, I think, an excellent job in the security cooperation realm. Some of it's been more quiet, but the public stuff, including products from Endural, Switchblade, I mean, we're talking about lethal expendable drones, the AMRAAM missiles, the ground-based ones in the NASAM system, which, our Norwegian friends had to kind of sign off on. So understanding that there's some international support, including from Europe, and again, more understanding from other allies and partners about the importance of Taiwan. And that's like a medium range air defense capability. So things are definitely moving in the right direction. I think the same thing, I'm quite optimistic about the future on the US side. We should remember that in, at the end of the Trump administration, the Taiwanese people were pretty happy with what they had seen over 4 years. And they actually, in polling after polling, were supportive of President Trump during that US election. And I think, based on my trips over there, they're looking forward to the next 4 years. I mean, we had the highest ranking US official to visit Taiwan since the breakup of official relations was Alex Azar. I had the opportunity to represent President Ambassador O'Brien and join him on that trip, which was at the height of the pandemic and was really about exchanging best practices and learning what we could from Taiwan in that, really critical emergency time. And then the highest ranking diplomat to go to Taiwan since the breakup of officials is a member of this task force, Keith Krok. So some real, I think, pleasant memories on both sides, and we look forward to the next 4 years. But I'll stop there.
Thank you. He did. Alex Wong did go in early in the first Trump administration.
Current deputy general, the future deputy national.
Yes. Yes, that's a memorable event. Thank you, Ivan. That's a helpful rundown of the military and security situation and recommendations. And perhaps I'll just turn to Carolyn, and then I'd like to also turn back to you, sir, since you're here, to get a few thoughts. But Carolyn, I'd like to get your thoughts on how the trade and economic recommendations that we made have stood the test of time as well, and anything that we might be missing up to now.
Thanks. And I join everybody in thanking and commending Ambassador O'Brien and Allison for pulling this group together and leading us through this. I will note, going back probably to about 2008, at one point, I think I was actually the highest ranking U.S. government official in my China commission. I was the chairman who was in Taiwan, which was pointed out to me by Dan Blumenthal when we were over there. I wasn't traveling on a diplomatic passport, but nonetheless. And just wanted to note the importance of the bipartisanship of all of this. So Taiwan has had strong, deep bipartisan support for a long time. As I listen to thinking about where we are in terms of viewing China as competition, it's taken us several decades of pushing both on the Democratic and Republican side to get people to get to that awareness. But the support for Taiwan has been there all along, and it continues. And I think it's really important for the bipartisanship to continue, because this is a national security issue for all of us, and it sends an important message to Taiwan, to Beijing, and to elsewhere around the world when we work on this in a bipartisan basis. So thanks. I also just wanted to mention just some of the basic, remember the basic statistics of our economic relationship with Taiwan, that the U.S. is Taiwan's second largest trading partner, and Taiwan is the U.S.'s 9th largest trading partner. Also want to acknowledge the potential of harnessing the innovation and the entrepreneurial spirit of the people of the U.S. and of the people of Taiwan as we all move forward. As I watch what is happening with defense technology in Ukraine, it's really interesting to see and to think about the innovation that's taking place and the innovation that needs to take place. And I think that Taiwan has a really critically important part in that, of course, because of semiconductors, but also because of the intellectual capital that people bring to this, the innovation and the entrepreneurial spirit. I think that the recommendations that we made a year ago still really hold up well. We'll quickly review them, that the U.S. and Taiwan should take substantive steps to liberalize trade ties in a targeted manner. We'll note there, of course, that Taiwan could contribute to the liberalization by lowering some existing trade barriers, which continue to serve as a bit of a thorn in the ongoing discussions. But I think that it's a really important trade relationship that we have. There's a lot of room for expansion there. Building on what Shihoko said, to create more space for Taiwan in international and multilateral fora, certainly we should be advocating for Taiwan's inclusion in regional multilateral economic groupings. Primary organizer of IPEF, of course, the U.S. should work to overcome opposition to Taiwan's membership in that framework. There's always the ability and the opportunity to expand private sector connections. Again, innovation, STEM, all of those issues. Taiwan has a lot to offer the world. I always think of this in terms of the public health crisis and the fact that they were not allowed to participate in some of the WHO response against the COVID pandemic, really disadvantaged people around the world. And we need to be able to make sure that our companies and our governments are able to work together to harness that capability. We obviously need to develop stronger stronger, more substantive mechanisms to engage on semiconductors and supply chain security. Again, if China ends up succeeding in cutting off access to semiconductors, that's not just a problem for the U.S., it's a problem for everybody in the global supply chain. We need to be very aware of that. And I was going to say one of the other issues, of course, has to do with the double taxation, which I guess I still continue to hope against hope gets resolved in this Congress, and we can take that off of the list of things that happen. But
Can you tell us where we are with that?
Allison, are you following this? I mean, I think there are people who are still trying to get it done. There's not a whole lot of time left in this congressional session and a whole lot that they do need to accomplish. But Allison, update on that?
I think exactly that, just that it's not making its way through and we're running out of time. But there's been a lot of support for it. It just there's a lot of other things happening in the world and a lot of other things that Congress has to think about, as we all know. It keeps getting lost in the mix of that.
Yeah. So, I mean, the reality is we have a vibrant future together with the people of Taiwan, economically, politically, diplomatically, even militarily. And I think that I am encouraged that the new administration will take steps to take advantage of the opportunities that are there, as I said, to develop stronger private sector relationships, but also government to government relationships on STEM issues and on all of the areas in which we can cooperate together and build on trade. I mean, people in the United States are seeing Taiwan companies moving into their states, moving into their districts, sometimes with manufacturing facilities. I think that's a very important thing for people to see. And congratulations to everybody on the task force for actually putting together recommendations that still hold a year later. Thanks.
Thank you, Carolyn. Ambassador O'Brien, I wondered if you might share some thoughts on how these recommendations may fit in with the new Trump administration as they're thinking through the Taiwan issue. I won't say problem, it's not a problem, but the opportunity that we have with Taiwan.
Okay, yeah. So listen, I think we're going to have a really strong administration when it comes to Taiwan. Peace through strength is back, and that's great news for Taiwan. The strategic ambiguity is going to stay the policy. I think that there's probably no one better than President Trump to have strategic ambiguity because on one hand, he'll say we're gonna have war if they invade Taiwan, and he'll say we want peace in the region, and Taiwan's part of China. So he creates a lot of ambiguity on his own, and does it in a very strong, effective way. So I think the Chinese will be on their back foot a little bit and trying to deal with Trump. And look, China has economic, issues of its own now that they did not have before. And so I think those are at the forefront of Xi's mind as he, figures out what he's going to do with Taiwan. So hopefully between the strength of a Trump administration coming back and the peace and strength approach, the Ronald Reagan approach, which is a little different than the de-escalatory, the non-provoking approach to the current administration, combined with some of China's own economic issues, will push this dream of Xi to reunite, forcibly or not, with Taiwan down the road. I think personnel is policy, and when you look at the personnel that have been selected, and of course it's been a parlor game to watch, every day at 3 or 4 o'clock in the afternoon. What comes out on Truth Social, right? So it's who's getting appointed to what position. Well, we look at the national security side of it. Elise Stefanik at the UN, I think she's going to be very, very pro Taiwan at the UN. Congresswoman from New York, very solid. So he's really hitting back on the anti-Semitism that we've seen at the UN and in some of our elite institutions. And at the State Department, Marco Rubio. I mean, Marco Rubio his parents left a communist country, a country that was free, and then became a communist country and he had to flee. So he's got very strong sympathy as a Cuban American for the Taiwanese American experience. And then you look at his deputy, Chris Landau, the very, very strong diplomat. If you look at the National Security Council, we're very blessed to have Mike Waltz as the 29th National Security Advisor. Tremendous guy. He's wise. He's been in combat. You know, he's a guy who's fought wars who doesn't want to see another war happen. And so his first choice as deputy, the first person he put in was Alex Wong. We've mentioned Alex's name a few times here. Alex has family ties to Taiwan. He's Asian American. I think his parents are immigrants to the United States. So he's going to bring a very strong Asia focus, kind of the way Pottinger did when I was National Security Advisor, kind of the way Kurt Campbell did for Jake. So at a very senior level, and I don't want to say who's going to be the next senior director for Asia Pacific, but it's going to be someone who's incredibly strong and smart, and someone we know and love. And so we're going to have a great senior director, but he's going to be supported by Alex and by Mike. So I think at the National Security Council level, we're going to have a lot of support for the Republic of China. So I think that Beijing's got to be, we'll have to deal with the Trump administration, with it won't be business as usual. It's been a little bit business as usual the last 3 or 4 years. That's going to end, and they're going to have to take America as being a strong America. And look, we weren't fundamentally weak before. It was just a perception of America was weak. So the perception of America is now going to be, I think, in line with the fact that we are a strong country, and we've got a strong relationship with Taiwan. We've given assurances, the famous assurances to Taiwan, and I think the Trump administration is going to be a very good period of time. Now, on the not the downside, but I think Trump's a deal maker. The Chinese are going to want to make deals with Donald Trump, but the Taiwanese need to be prepared to make deals. So that TSMC factory and fabric in Arizona, Morris Chang's got to get with the program, get that thing built and up and operating very quickly. President Trump's going to be watching the Taiwanese, and he looks at Taiwan. He understands the pressure Taiwan is under. He understands the challenges Taiwan faces from a security standpoint, but he also looks at Taiwan and sees rich people, and he sees Taiwan as a very rich country. And so I don't think he's going to be willing to underwrite, Taiwan's defense anymore. And so I think you're going to see the Taiwanese coming, the ROCs coming with big purchases of U.S. weapon systems to balance out the trade deficit. I think you're going to see Taiwanese companies that have been so successful, like TSMC is just amazing. I mean, the world literally cannot function without TSMC, which is amazing. But I think you're going to see TSMC is going to have to invest more in America. And so I think the president's going to be looking for deals with Taiwan and with China. So Taiwan's going to have to step up to the plate on the deal front. I think that'll happen. And I think Taiwan, because of its wealth and its entrepreneurship and its ingenuity and its hard work, is in a position to do some deals that help the American people as well. So look, I think the next 4 years could be very good for Taiwan. I think it'll play its cards right. And as I mentioned before, they were fast out of the gate, congratulating the president on his victory. I think that's going to go a long way as well to remind the president that he's got good friends in Taiwan.
Thank you,
Over to you.
Ambassador. Thank you. And I know you have a hard stop here in a couple of minutes. So we will say thank you to you. And I want to open up to our panel for any further comments. And then I'd like to open up for a few questions. But please join me in thanking Ambassador O'Brien for his visit today. Great. Any additional thoughts on what we've shared so far? And then audience, start thinking of your questions, please.
Yeah, just to follow up on what Ambassador O'Brien said, it really strikes me listening to the people who are going to be going into the administration that we are in a position where they understand the competitive threat from China. So we don't have to spend time convincing people of that. And for those of us who've been working on this issue for 30 years, each administration that has come in, we've had to spend time demonstrating why the administration should be concerned about China. And it's kind of refreshing to know that we can spend time moving things forward instead of having to educate the people who are in there about why they need really to be paying attention to China and the threat that China is providing to the United States and of course to Taiwan. I have a question for Ivan, if that's okay, and that is, can you just talk a little bit? I mean, we see this increasing militarization, including right now, right, that China is doing towards Taiwan. Can you just reflect on that a little bit? What is happening? Is Taiwan prepared? What do we need to be doing to support them? Sorry, I feel like I'm hijacking things, but it seems to me that's a really
Great question.
Yeah.
It is a great question, Caroline, and obviously thanks to all the work about raising awareness that you've done for years and years and years. And there's an incredible, well, there's just an incredible body of work, right, that you've been so instrumental in from the commission over the years. So thanks for that. It's been very important in shifting and arriving at this consensus that we have in Washington and really across the country. To answer your question, I think if we step back, it's important to understand that the PLA has been, which is China's military, right, has been modernizing and investing and growing in a way that we've watched. And I think a lot of close PLA watchers have anticipated. And the expectation, I think we could have said 10 years ago or even 20 years ago, was that, guess what, in 2024, they're going to be able to fly a lot of planes and drive a lot of ships over the ocean at night, and things that they couldn't do before. And so I think we just have to keep that in mind, that that is a capability, a capacity, right, that they possess, that we expected them to possess. And, you know, for someone like me with a military background, that I expect them to have to exercise on a somewhat routine basis. And so these exercises are going to happen. And so my view of it is that they are using the opportunity to send political signals, right, when certain things happen, whether it be an inauguration speech or National Day speech, or a transit through U.S. territory. And so when you look at it in that context, they're sort of just seizing on an opportunity to send a message. And it's important to understand that this is part of signaling, and it might be signaling intent, but it doesn't really tell us anything new about capability. We know they have, you know, however number, hundreds of ships, aircraft, missiles, et cetera, et cetera. I think the people of Taiwan should instinctively know that there are hundreds, really thousands, of ground-based missiles sitting across the strait 100 miles away. And if China wants to hit a button, they don't need to launch a plane. They don't need to launch a ship. So the threat is always there. And I think it's important to kind of step back a bit and just understand that, okay, they're in some ways, you know, to speak plainly, sort of having a temper tantrum when they do these exercises. And I think if we look at it through that kind of lens, it's important that we'll have a little better perspective about it.
Thanks. That's very helpful. Chiyoko, anything else to add?
Yeah, just to echo or perhaps provide the flip side of what Ivan's been talking about regarding China expressing displeasure from the military perspective. It also does so on the economic front as well. And we know that China is without doubt the economic hegemon of the region. And it leverages that. It does that through coercive action. And it has done so towards Taiwan. It has done so towards many so-called middle powers in the region and and beyond, but it is now taking those actions towards the United States, especially as it curtails, imposes export control, export bans on critical minerals towards the United States. So although there is not a kinetic war with China at the moment, there is already an economic war in play. There is an opportunity, therefore, to have greater economic coordination and cooperation. And I know that there will be questions about US policy in terms of tariffs, protectionism, and industrial policy. But putting that aside, I believe there is greater opportunity now to show economic peace through strength insofar as we coordinate on shared economic interests as well. Thanks.
Thank you. Well said. Thank you very much. Well, I'd like to open up for a few questions, just a handful, and before we wrap up today. Iris, I saw you first.
I had a shawl years mission. I remember one of the exciting talk during the delegation trip was 1 year out of Russia's invasion to Ukraine. There's a lot of talks at the government level, at the civil society level, with the delegation on the defense resilience, and then President Lai came into office and started this Presidential Whole of Society Defense Resilience Committee. So I'm interested in your view of the assessment of how Taiwan's efforts is going on, and I think that was also talked about in the delegation's trip is like what are the lessons we could learn from the U.S. in terms of homeland security and beyond. Also, is there any joint efforts and opportunities?
Thanks, Iris. Iris is actually a member of the delegation because she was, going around with us throughout Taipei in her former role at TechRo. So thank you very much, Iris. Great to see you again. I'd like to jump in on that one.
So my most recent trip to Taiwan, as I mentioned, was in September, and I got to watch some of these, one in particular, a big self-resilience, societal resilience exercise in New Taipei City. I think the Taiwanese vice president was there, the AIT director was there, through, a couple of NGOs that participated and helped generate all the training and the drills that we observed. And overall, my sense is that President Lai has really prioritized resilience in a way that goes a step beyond what we've seen even in recent years under President Tsai, who obviously did a great job. But what we're seeing outside of the Ministry of Defense, so in almost every other ministry now, we're seeing movement toward understanding that they too have to have contingency plans, which is very much like a military thing to do. And other ministries wouldn't normally think in those terms, but they are. And so whether it's, the health folks and having all the medical stuff, or it's the agriculture folks and having enough food stores and how they would execute in an extremist situation, making sure there's energy available. And so that kind of planning, I think, and investment, which it will hopefully turn into, will then increase even further the confidence of the Taiwanese people. And if the Taiwanese people have more confidence that they can at least resist for longer periods of time, and you can demonstrate it through these actions, these investments that are happening across society, that increases deterrence. There's no way it doesn't, I think, because then everybody else in the world, especially Beijing, sees that and sees that, oh wow, they're gonna really resist, right? And I better not do this silly thing that Vladimir Putin did and assume that the country's going to collapse when I invade it, because it's not. So I think these efforts are really important, and I'm actually very optimistic watching them unfold.
Really?
But just to add to that, because I spoke to a group of people interested in transatlantic issues the other night, and somebody had been to Taiwan relatively recently, and he said, people are not prepared enough. So I think part of the issue is to make sure that the civilian response is both being ramped up, but that the story about that is being told, so that people who are just going to Taiwan, who might not know a whole lot about what's going on, see evidence of the fact that there is civil defense training, for example. So it's not to do any disrespect for this delegation, but so that it's other people who are going can see that that's happening. Because I do sometimes hear, well, you know, the people of Taiwan are gonna just not fight back or something like that. And my response to that is none of us know how any of us would respond if our country was invaded, right? So I am of the belief that the people of Taiwan will fight back, but I think that it is important for that story to be told. Obviously, you don't want to go into a whole lot of details about it, but I think that there needs to be a little bit more public focus and public attention, and perhaps even reporting on those kinds of activities that are taking place. Ukraine, I find myself thinking again, sorry, there's a hijacking this just a little bit, but none of us would have predicted what happened in Syria. I mean, 12 days ago, we wouldn't have predicted what happened in Syria. And that is a setback for Vladimir Putin. And I find myself wondering, as Xi Jinping is watching and aligning himself with Russia, if that is going to inform any decision-making. Now, I don't know that we'll ever know that, but I mean, he sees, you know, right? I mean, Putin thought he was going to take Ukraine in 3 days. It's over 1,000 days later, and at terrible human cost and financial cost to both countries, to both Ukraine and Russia. He hasn't succeeded. He's losing the support in places. I mean, he's lost Syria. He is facing defeats in a number of places, and I guess I keep hoping that Xi Jinping will see that and decide that perhaps this is not quite a done deal as he might be thinking that it is. Ivan or Shahok, thoughts on that?
Many things have happened in a series of just a couple of days that none of us could have predicted. And I'm thinking about South Korea all the time, but we are not going to talk about that here. No, I think it's very important to think about the unknowns and the what ifs and the black swans events that could happen, as you were just talking about. But let's move on to another question up front, and then I'll come to the middle. Ma'am, up front, yeah. Yeah, no, sorry.
Yeah, hi, my name is Tina Chung. I'm with Voice of America's China Division. I'd just like to follow up with what Ivan was talking about, the PLA military exercises. So a lot of people are saying that this is a sort of a warning to the incoming administration on the red line, the Chinese red line on Taiwan. I wonder how you see this, you know, sending signal, because you were just saying about, you know, signaling. And also, it is reported that, you know, President-elect Trump has invited Chinese President Xi Jinping to come to his inauguration. And I was going to ask Ambassador O'Brien, but he left. So I'm thinking that could this be a good opportunity if he does come, or if this is really true and he decides to come? Would it be a good opportunity, you know, for both leaders to talk about the issue on Taiwan and to, you know, for easing of the tensions in the Strait? Thank you.
I'll make an attempt there. So I think that it is, you know, we're talking about the exercises are a signaling. There aren't that many clear red lines. I don't think there were 4 quote unquote red lines issued to President Biden during this last engagement that they had that I think most of us interpreted as really a message to the next incoming administration. But they were, I would say, quite standard and vague and not surprising to me to hear from China. And so I think it is valuable at regular intervals for the leaders to be talking, to get down to more specific, you know, notions to avoid misunderstandings, and so folks don't take actions that are misinterpreted, you know, to avoid sort of some kind of security dilemma or escalatory situation. Whether that happens, you know, on Inauguration Day or not, I don't know any more than anybody else here. But I imagine President Trump will want to have a conversation, you know, in short order after inauguration with, General Secretary Xi Jinping. So, and the relationship will be what it will. Our experience that Alice and I lived through, that there was constant communication between us. And, there are I think some narratives out there that, during the Trump administration, even in the final year of the Trump administration, when things were quite, I guess, unhappy between the two countries, right? In the wake of COVID, Hong Kong, the national security legislation, and things like that, there was no breakdown of communication. We were in contact with the embassy here, and our embassy in Beijing was in contact with the government of China. So, how you go about and what the policies are, I think is more important, right? So I'll kind of leave it at that. Allison, anything?
Yeah, no, that's right. I mean, what you said about the various narratives about previous administration, and I very distinctly remember having lots of meetings with the ambassador, even during very difficult times. And I think, it makes a lot of sense just going through the first Trump administration and seeing how President Trump likes to operate. As Ivan said, I would expect a high-level engagement very, very early on, whether that's a meeting, a visit, a phone call. It's to be expected and shouldn't be, there's nothing surprising about that. It's world leaders talking to one another. So if that happens, it makes sense to me too. They're in the middle.
Thank you, Allison. A great program, and kudos to Global Taiwan Institute for this. Tom McDevitt, Chairman of the Washington Times. Back in September of 23, State Department did the report on the PRC's attempt to dominate the information space with cognitive warfare. And I think in the report mentioned that billions were being spent by China in that domain. Our team looked at that, Bill Gertz, folks like that, and I know Joe Bosco's written on things like this with The Hill. We're interested in the potential of a strategic communications effort that's both private sector, public sector, media, to push back on the false narratives that the PRC puts out. Would love to hear any thoughts that you would have from the panel on advice on what impact could that make, a strategic communications effort to tell the story about Taiwan and the bigger picture, both in the U.S. and globally. We're very interested in, already we started launching an effort in that regard. Thank you.
Thank you. I'll just start by saying, as it's been pointed out, this feels like the right moment for that kind of activity. You have a bipartisan interest in counter-China activities. You have bipartisan interest in Taiwan and the relationship with Taiwan. And misinformation, disinformation, cognitive warfare is a hot topic for lots of very good reasons. In terms of advice, I think, looking at the new team that's coming in, looking for opportunities with the administration, looking for opportunities to engage with them, whether that's through state vectors or even NSC vectors. There are, I think would be a lot of interest in having those conversations. It may take a while for people to get settled and be open to that, but I think that just an assessment that there will be interest in learning more about your interests and sort of the ideas, but maybe I'll open up for additional.
Well, I'll put on my other hat, which is I'm chairman of the board of Radio Free Asia, and we spend a lot of time thinking about and working on how to put accurate, independent information out there and to counter disinformation and misinformation, not only in the region, though. I will note that we recently opened an office in Brisbane so that we were doing some work in the Pacific Islands, some reporting in the Pacific Islands. And of course, we have somebody here from VOA. They're also doing some of this, but we have established a fact-check lab to directly address misinformation and disinformation. One of the most recent successful examples of that was that Beijing tried to indicate that the wildfires in Maui were created. Was it U.S. military or something? It was done by the U.S. government, and we had people who went in and fact checked to illustrate indeed that was inaccurate information. So I think a continued investment in the institutions that we have, like RFA, is going to be critically important going forward. We are also trying I know that there's an effort over at USAGM to take the reporting that is being done by RFA, RFE, Middle East Broadcasting, translating it into Chinese and disseminating it through the diaspora, because the problem that we have, of course, is not just Chinese misinformation here in the United States. It's happening in Australia. It's happening across Africa, the training of journalists, all of these things that are going on. So I would love to engage in more of a discussion with you about this specifically with that hat on, but I think a continued investment is going to be really important.
Thank you. Okay, one last question. One last question.
Thank you. Joe Bosco, formerly with the Defense Department. Question for Carolyn, actually, although others are welcome to comment. Carolyn, you've stressed the bipartisanship element of the US-Taiwan relationship. And I'm wondering, I was hoping Ambassador O'Brien would stay here to discuss this point. But what would you think of the possibility of a joint statement by President Biden and President-elect Trump on the U.S. commitment to Taiwan to eliminate any doubts that people may have in Taiwan or in this country or in Beijing about that U.S. commitment, and whether a change in administration is going to mean a change in U.S. policy? How about if they both issued a joint statement stating that they agree with each other that Taiwan is essential to democracy in the world and to U.S. national interest?
Joe, it's nice to see you, and thank you for your leadership on these issues. Again, over the decades that we've all been working on, I think a joint statement is a good idea. I have no idea if something like that is even possible right now. I am not privy to what is going on inside the transition, but I think any message that can be sent that the commitment is strong, it's continuing, because I know that when we talk about misinformation and disinformation, the Chinese are trying to get the people of Taiwan to believe that the U.S. won't be there for them if the U.S. is needed, and we need to be able to work together to do that. So, I'm happy to try to talk to some people. I don't know how much communication is taking place, especially as the world seems to be going crazy and all of these things. But Alex Wong's name has come up a couple of times, and I just keep thinking, you get up one day and it's Syria, you get up the next day it's South Korea, you get up, I can tell I've been in Washington a long time, because every time a crisis happens in the world, my first thought is to the people at the NSC and the State Department who are now having to deal with crisis X. But, I think that assuring the people of Taiwan that our commitment is strong is an important thing to do. Whether that can be done through a joint statement or not, Joe, I just honestly don't know.
Yes. Well, thank you. Thank you for the questions. Great questions, thoughtful questions, and thank you to the panel. In terms of the way forward, as Ambassador O'Brien mentioned, we've been doing this for a couple of years, actually. Our little group has been together for a couple of years, since July of 22, working on this issue. And we expect to continue. As we said, we'll lose a couple of members, a few members maybe, bring on a couple of additional members, but feel that the real importance of continuing our work to review the relationship, particularly as President Trump comes back into office and we have a new administration beginning to work with President Lai's team as well. So we plan to continue working. We hope you will continue to read and come to these events and ask great questions and join us in doing that. But I again, thank you, Russell. Thank you, Global Taiwan Institute, Jennifer Hu, who couldn't be here today, for all the wonderful support that we get from GTI. Thank you for your interest, and happy holidays. Merry Christmas. Thank you.